bill on the calendar for the day is House File 4252. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File number 4252, an act relating to higher education, modifying student aid reporting requirements.
There are amendments at the desk. If there's no objection, we'll let the author explain the bill before we act on the amendments. I recognize the member from Benton, Representative Wolgamott.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm proud to present to you House File 4252, which is the agreement that was reached for the Higher Education Finance and Policy Bill. There are three things I would like you to focus on with this bill. The first of which is the appropriation of $1.5 million to the Minnesota state system to combat the problem of ghost students by creating a identification verification system. We also have a one-time appropriation of $5,000 for trees at Bemidji State University. And there are some non-controversial recommendations from the Office of Higher Education. This bill reflects the agreement from both sides of the aisle. And on that note, I would like to thank Chair Robbins, Chair Rarick, and Vice Chair Coulter, as well as all of the members of the committee for their efforts in this bill. I understand that there are amendments to this bill, but would urge a green vote, and we'll look forward to discussion and questions on third reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the amendments.
There is an amendment at the desk. The Chief Clerk will report the amendment.
Rarick moves to amend House File number 4252, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A20.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this amendment is about electing regents. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but we didn't actually elect any regents last session, did we? You gotta wonder why. I have a lot of questions, as I always do. So let's just talk about it. So at the end of session last year, I had the paperwork ready. I'd signed it. The Senate had signed it so we could do the joint convention here on the floor where the senators come in and we vote on regents. And for whatever reason, I'm not going to ascribe any motives, but that did not happen. I couldn't get the other chair to sign on so that we could actually have the election. So then what happened? Well, if you know anything about regents, you know that if we don't elect regents, then the governor gets to appoint regents. So the governor did. On August 12th of 25 of last year, he appointed 4 regents. Now, 2 of the regents, all of us on the Higher Committee knew very, very well who they were. We had met with them, we had vetted them, they went through the joint committee. So the joint committee is when the Higher Ed House and the Higher Ed Senate meet together, and we go through the whole list of candidates that are sent to us from RCAC. So what's RCAC? RCAC is the Regent Candidate Advisory Council. So there are some senators, some representatives. My husband's senator is on the RCAC. My brother, who was a state representative here for 10 years, is still on the RCAC right now. There's members of the community. So it's a large group of people that vet candidates. So RCAC makes their decisions, and they go through and they do all of their process, and then they send that list of their top people to the legislature. We had the joint committee, and we actually had elected, or we had passed through, I should say, to the full floor. But then things just stalled out because I couldn't get agreement from my co-chair on the Democrat side to hold the joint convention. So that's what happened there. Then it went to the governor, and like I said, so he appointed 4 people. The first 2 people are 2 people that came out, well, actually we discussed, not one of them didn't actually pass through the joint committee. It was Ellen Lugar and Kosar Mohammed. So we knew who they were. That's not a surprise. But I have his press release right here. I have the governor's press release. So the other 2 people we had never heard of. One was Joel Bergstrom, and one was Samuel Hines. So when I saw that, I thought, who are these people? They didn't come through any of our process. They didn't go through RCAC. They didn't come through the joint committee. So I did a little digging to find out who the governor decided to appoint. Well, let's start with Samuel Hines. So Samuel Hines, I'm sure, is well known to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, because when I looked at campaign finance, he and his wife gave a total of $380,000 to, I think, all Democrat candidates and campaigns. I couldn't find anything that looked conservative or Republican. So, and that's from 2009 to 2015. So that's what campaign finance has in their data. Now, I didn't go looking at the federal data, so I'm sure he gave some there as well to federal candidates. But again, $380,000 to primarily, I think solely, but I have to look to make sure, do a little more digging, Democrat candidates. So he and his wife gave a lot of money to Democrats. And I would say, too, when I dug up a little bit closer, how much did he give to the Walz campaign? You know, Governor Walz is the one that appointed him. It was just over $30,000. $30,000. So he and his wife gave $30,000 to Governor Walz, who then appointed him to the Board of Regents. So that was candidate number one. Now let's look at candidate number two. So the second regent that was appointed, Joel Bergstrom. So I did a little digging, and I found that Joel Bergstrom in October of 23 bought a house in Minneapolis, a very nice house, a very expensive house in Minneapolis, with a woman by the name of Anne Victoria O'Connor. So who is Anne O'Connor? Did a little digging, and I found a news article. And the reason I had to do a little digging is because there are no staff listed on the governor's website. Don't know why, but there isn't. So I found a news article about Anne O'Connor. And it's a MnPost article. And we all remember when Governor Walz was out campaigning to be the vice president. And so MnPost asked him, well, who's running your office while you're out doing this? And this is a MnPost article from August 20th of 24. And this is what the governor said. Our Deputy Chief of Staff, Richard Kelbom, has taken over day-to-day management in the office, and Anne O'Connor continues to lead the cabinet. So at that moment, Anne O'Connor was the third highest paid person in the governor's office, and she was running his cabinet. So all of the commissioners, she was telling all the commissioners what to do or not do. So that was the second person. That was the second person that the governor appointed. So what does this amendment do? What this amendment does is say, hey, you know what? The legislature should decide. And if the legislature won't decide, like I couldn't get agreement from the other side of the aisle to actually hold the joint convention, then the candidates that came out of the legislative committee, so when the House and Senate meet together and have our legislative committee, candidates that come out of that is a pool that the governor can then pick from. So he can't just pick whoever he wants, people that gave to his campaign, people that are living with his essentially chief of staff when he was out campaigning with Harris. In fact, when we had this as a bill in front of us in the Higher Ed Committee, one of our members, not my members, one of your members on your side said, when I kept calling it a conflict of interest of what we found, she actually called it a pay to play. So I didn't go that far, but another representative on our committee that's a Democrat said that this is actually a pay to play, which is a much more serious accusation. So that's what this amendment would do. It would make sure that the candidates that the governor would pick are not his buddies, not his campaign donors, but they are actually people that came through the joint legislative committee. And if there's a very strange circumstance that we don't have a joint legislative committee, which I can't remember ever happening, I've been here a long time, then and only then the governor could pick from the pool that came through RCAC. So that's the Regent Advisory Committee. So that is what, Mr. Speaker, that is what the A20 does. It limits the governor's power so he can no longer do pay to play.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Gaultier moves to amend the Rarick Amendment to House File Number 4252, the second engrossment. The amendment to the amendment is coded A25.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So before we get into the A25 amendment, I think it's important for us to have a little bit fuller of a conversation around the underlying, the A20 amendment. So, Mr. Speaker, would Representative Rarick yield to a question?
She will yield, Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Rarick. So you laid out, Representative Rarick, the concerns that you have with the appointments that the governor made last summer, I think it was, or fall. So I guess my sort of basic question is, as I read the amendment language here, as you said, it says that if the legislature does not elect, then the governor must appoint someone who was recommended by the Joint Committee. If the Joint Committee doesn't make any recommendations, governor must appoint someone recommended by the RCAC. So my question is if the concern is avoiding those particular issues, how does this amendment prevent that?
Representative Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Coulter, it limits who the governor can pick. It limits it to who the legislature have already passed through right before we get our final 4. So we passed 8 through because we couldn't agree on the same ones. And so we sent 8 through from the Joint Committee, which would have come to the floor. And from that pool of 8, we would have elected 4. Now, I know what you're going to say is that we can still nominate somebody from the floor that didn't make it through that panel, but then that's still up to us, the legislature, which is our duty to actually appoint who's going to elect who's going to be the next regent. And I would say that the Board of Regents is not a small task. It's a board of 12 that literally decide the budget of the University of Minnesota, which is a $4 billion, almost $5 billion per year budget. So it's a very big budget. It's a very big deal. And I know that they're unpaid, but there is a tremendous amount of influence and power and connection and networking that happens as a regent member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Speaker. Well, and thank you, Representative Rarick, for that information. None of it really answered the question that I asked, though, because, again, as I read the amendment, it does limit the pool from which the governor would draw from for potential appointments, but it doesn't limit how anyone gets into that pool in the first place. And all it would take is for somebody who has all of the same issues that you're concerned about to be recommended by the RCAC or to be recommended by the Joint Committee, and the governor would still be free to appoint them. And I recall when we were discussing this idea in committee, you referred to how the RCAC and the Joint Committee do that vetting. And so I would intuit from that the idea would be that the RCAC or the Joint Committee would not, would be sort of the backstop. Thank you. Would be the sort of the backstop from donors or friends or whoever it is from serving on the Board of Regents. And so I appreciate that information. That is helpful context. And Mr. Speaker, I would request a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so that's, members, that is what brings us to the A25 secondary amendment, because it does build on a few kernels of good ideas. And so what this amendment would do is say that if the legislature, for whatever reason, does not elect University of Minnesota regents, that we should still honor the work of the RCAC. And so this amendment would then limit the field to who the governor could appoint to anyone who has met the eligibility criteria that the RCAC determines. And the advantage of that is that this is an objective process that is laid out in statute. It provides for what the kinds of things that the RCAC should consider in determining that those criteria. It also eliminates a potential separation of powers issue, because if we limit who the governor can appoint to only those recommended by the Joint Legislative Committee, that power that the governor has, that constitutional power, is subject to the whims of how the legislature looks at that particular time. The other sort of kernel of a good idea here, I think, is removing the appearance in, God forbid, even actuality of pay to play, of buying a seat on the Board of Regents. But it does so by recognizing that that process, the process of electing regents, University of Minnesota regents, primarily lives with us, the legislature. And in fact, before last year, the last time that the legislature failed to elect regents was more than 20 years ago. And before that, in fact, it was 30 years. It was actually 13 years before I was even born. And so what this secondary amendment says is that the RCAC and the Joint Committee must not recommend anyone who, in the previous 2 years, has made a campaign contribution to the committees of any legislative caucus, of any member of the Joint Legislative Committee, or any member of legislative leadership. And I think there is a kernel of a good idea here, which is that in politics, a rose by any other name does not smell as sweet. Perception matters. And we should acknowledge that that starts with us.
Recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I rise in opposition to the Coulter Amendment, to the Rarick Amendment. There's a lot of problems with this, but the first one is what he just closed with. So it says that in his amendment, the Advisory Council cannot recommend anyone who's contributed to legislatures or our caucuses, but it's silent on people who've contributed to the governor, which is the problem we're trying to address. So the amendment is not addressing the issue we are actually trying to address. We are trying to preserve legislative authority. If anyone has not read the University of Minnesota's charter, it explicitly states that the Board of Regents shall be elected by the legislature. This is our responsibility that predates statehood. Once statehood happened, the university was created, statehood happened, and we were designated with the authority to elect the Board of Regents. That is our duty under the charter, and we have to fulfill that duty. It was shameful last year that we failed to do our duty and punted it to the governor. And then the governor, rather than taking the recommendations from the Joint Legislative Committee, which does incredible work to vet these people and takes recommendations from the RCAC, but it's broader than RCAC, and that matters. We are an independent branch of government, and we certainly take with great respect the RCAC recommendations. We interview every single one of them. But we are a separate institution, and we have our own views on how the university should be governed. And we should take that seriously, and only candidates recommended by the Joint Legislative Committee should be sent to the governor, because that's the legislature's input to the governor if, in fact, we fail to do our duty. I hope we don't fail to do our duty again. It was shameful that we didn't get it done last year. But this amendment, 8, doesn't address the problems of people who contribute to the governor, but B, it takes the Joint Committee out of it, and that is one of our most important duties as a legislature, to provide for governance of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. So I ask the body to reject the Coulter Amendment and adopt the Rarick Amendment. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to stand to make it really, really clear what this vote is about. This is about pay to play. This may not be a perfect amendment to the amendment, but this is a vote where you get to say whether you think it's okay to pay to play. And let's be really clear, our whole federal government right now looks very pay to play. President Trump is taking money left and right and doling out favors left and right, and we all know that. The corruption is unprecedented. And so if people in this body want to separate themselves from that and say that pay to play is not all right, and by the way, I was the one that Representative Rarick was referring to in the committee, and I think that what I said was, this is not a conflict of interest issue that we're talking about, which was what it had been called. This is called pay to play. That is exactly what it is. I'm not saying that that is what anybody did, but this is forward-looking. You all can complain about, Governor Walson, complain about a problem that happened last year that you didn't like, but that was a rare situation. Representative Robbins wants to solve the rare situation. What we're talking about is the situation that happens year after year after year, where there is at least an appearance of pay to play. Let's get rid of even the appearance of pay to play and vote for this secondary amendment, and then vote for the primary amendment when this secondary is part of the bill. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Wright, Representative Rarick.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is really interesting to me. So we're worried about pay to play, but we're not going to hold the governor accountable for $30,000 that one of the region candidates gave to his campaign. And there were many, many other things I have been told that this particular person helped the governor out in many, many ways. Like I said, I didn't look at all his federal campaigns, or all the federal campaigns. But this is exactly why we need the underlying amendment, not the amendment to the amendment, because in the amendment to the amendment, it doesn't say anything about money going to the governor. And that's where the pay to play is. So we're not even talking about the right pay to play. And it was so interesting, right? So it's been 20 years since we haven't elected regents here on this floor. Why is that? I'd like to ponder that for just a minute. Why did we not elect regents here on this floor? If it hasn't happened it's been 20 years since that we couldn't do that, I can tell you exactly why, because I was at the helm trying to make it happen. And I said I had my signature on the letter to start the process, I had Senator Fateh's signature to start the process, and I could not get agreement from the other side of the aisle to sign the letter to start the process. That's why we didn't elect regents. Because the other side of the aisle refused to. We could have. All it was one signature, and off to the races we would have been. And we wouldn't be in this position right now. And the governor would not have had the opportunity to appoint 4 regents, Ellen Lugar, who didn't make it through the joint committee. She didn't even get a single vote through the joint committee, not one vote. And Kosar Mohammed, who did make it through. And then 2 people that we had never heard of, we on this side of the aisle have never heard of. One of them, I'm sure that if Ann O'Connor, who was running his office when he was out campaigning with Harris, I'm sure that he was very, very social with Joel Bergstrom, and he certainly knew Samuel Hines and Samuel Hines' wife over the many, many, many years and years and years and years that they donated huge sums to Democrat candidates. That is what we're trying to stop with this amendment. That's the pay to play. I don't even know why you're doing this amendment. You cut out the legislature. The amendment to the amendment cuts us out of this process. The governor can pick anybody that he wants that came through RCAC, and he can pick anybody he wants that gave him huge sums of money. That's what this amendment to the amendment does. It's utterly ridiculous. Please vote no.
Any further discussion to the amendment to the amendment? I recognize the author of the amendment to the amendment, the member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's pretty funny to me that the claim was made that my amendment to the amendment doesn't say anything about anything going to the governor, because neither does the underlying amendment. I read this, you can read the amendment for yourself. It's not long, it's 15 lines. It doesn't say anything about how anyone ends up in the pool that the governor would draw from to make appointments. There is nothing stopping someone that raises the concerns that Representative Rarick and that Representative Robbins have been talking about from ending up in that pool based on this amendment. All they would have to do is be recommended by the RCAC or the Joint Committee, and we're right back where we started. So I can't say I'm surprised, but I am a little disappointed that it does not sound like the secondary amendment will go on, because I think if this language were to go on, this is language that we could bring into conference committee. I don't believe the underlying amendment is. But I would say that if members feel that a perception of hooking up donors with a seat on the University of Minnesota Board of Regents is a problem for the governor, then it's a problem for the folks in this room too. Last year, every Republican on the Higher Education Committee voted for candidates who have donated to Republican members of leadership, Republican members of the House and Senate Higher Education Committees. And most distressingly, on January 9th, one individual cut a check to the House Republican Campaign Committee, and on March 18th, every Republican on the Higher Education Committee voted to put them on the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. If that's a problem, folks, take the plank out of your own eye, too.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The chief clerk will call the name of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, no.
Bliss votes no. Hussein.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momani Hildsley.
Momani Hildsley, aye.
Momani Hildsley votes aye. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, yes.
Perez Vega votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment to the amendment is not adopted. To the underlying amendment, discussion. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I request a roll call? I will request a roll call.
You may request a roll call, and you may have it, Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes. This is really problematic language, does potentially create a separation of powers issue. I'm going to ask folks to vote no.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Coulter, you've a couple times referenced a separation of powers issue. And in your earlier, you referenced the governor's constitutional power to elect regents. Could you would Representative Coulter yield to a question?
He will yield, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Coulter, where would I find in the Constitution the governor's constitutional power to appoint regents?
Representative Coulter.
Oh, thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Representative Niska. You asked your question too quickly, and I couldn't find it. The governor's power to appoint regents, if there is a vacancy, exists within the University of Minnesota Charter, which exists by reference in the Constitution. I don't remember the exact section. Thank you.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Coulter. That is mostly correct. The governor does have the power in the University of Minnesota Charter if the legislature does not fulfill its duty in the Minnesota Charter, University of Minnesota Charter, to appoint regents for such time and with such limits as the legislature allows it to do so, to continue in office until the close of the session of the legislature, then next thereafter, and until others are elected in their stead. After it imposes on the duty on the legislature to elect those regions. And members, what we're seeing is the continuation of a caucus that refused to fulfill that legislative duty. That constitutional structure set out in the University of Minnesota Charter. And the reason why this amendment is so important is because it attempts to remove the incentive structure that allowed for one legislative caucus to undermine our duty under the University of Minnesota Charter to elect those regions. That duty resides first here. If we fail in our duty, then the governor has a limited power to elect to appoint temporary regions. But the governor doesn't have unlimited power, not under our Constitution, not under the University of Minnesota Charter. It's our job. It's our duty. And the only reason we're doing this amendment is to clean up from one caucus's obstruction of our duty, to remove the incentives that were in place that resulted in the exact situation that Representative Rarick talked about. So go ahead, vote against it. Show the people of Minnesota how seriously you take your duty here, our duty to oversee the University of Minnesota. Because this is the only regulation, this is the only power that the state of Minnesota has over the University of Minnesota. The University of Minnesota is a land-grant institution that predates our state, which means they get to basically govern themselves except for the people's right to choose the regents through their elected representatives here in the legislature. So that's our job. The governor doesn't have any power unless we fail to do our job. And the only reason we're even talking about this is because you failed to do your job. You prevented us from being able to do our job last year and are preventing us from doing our job this year. So thank you, Representative Rarick, for this amendment. We should pass it. We should pass it. But I have a sick feeling that the caucus that chose to prevent us from doing our duty is going to prevent us from fixing this problem as well. Members, vote green.
Any further discussion to the amendment? I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Wright, Representative Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Leader Niska. So we also talked about the constitutionality because this was a bill, and we talked about this at great length in the Higher Ed Committee. And we asked our nonpartisan staff, does this have a constitutional issue? And as Leader Niska also just pointed out, it does not. This does not limit the governor's ability to do what he can constitutionally do. That's a red herring. Saying that there is a constitutional issue to this amendment is an absolute and an utter red herring. But you know what's not a red herring? The fact that Joel Bergstrom and Samuel Hines are now regents at the University of Minnesota, and a pay-to-play happened, potentially. I do know that Samuel Hines donated over $30,000 to Governor Walz and to many candidates on the Democrat side and many caucuses on the Democrat side, and through fundraisers, and the fact that Joel Bergstrom is in a very interesting relationship with one of the most powerful people in the governor's office, was literally running the governor's office when he was out campaigning. when this was happening, she was the third highest paid person, and she bought a house with Joel Bergstrom. And this amendment would stop any future governor from doing the same shenanigans. So please vote yes and stop a future governor from doing the same stuff that this governor just did. I'm very glad that he has decided to not run again, because this is what the governor has done and would have continued to do. And I would, one last thing before I stop talking about this amendment, I would implore the other side of the aisle, we can still elect regents this session, and we can replace the ones that were just appointed by the governor. And if you really believe that that was a pay to play, if you really believe that that was a problem, then sign the paper so that we can elect new regents this session, because we certainly can do that. All 4 regents can be replaced by us this session. So if you really mean it, and you really think that this is a problem, and you really want to fix it, then work with us to actually elect new regents. We can still do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Vote yes.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Go ahead, Matt.
Bliss, aye.
Bliss votes aye. Hussein. Hussein. Momani Hilsley.
Momani Hilsley, no.
Momani Hilsley votes no. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega votes no.
Perez Vega votes no. Hussein.
Hussein, no.
Hussein votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 66 yeas and 67 yeas and 67 nays, the amendment does not prevail. There is an amendment at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment.
Coulter moves to amend House File number 4252, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A21.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to do this up front this time. I will request a roll call.
Roll call will be granted to Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this amendment deals with the state grant program. And I'm actually kind of surprised that this is the only amendment that we have related to the state grant program here, given that, one, the state grant program does face a significant shortfall, but two, this was identified as a priority, I think, for both sides on the committee. I am not sure how this is going to go, but as my wife would remind me, hope is a thing with feathers. So since this is the higher education bill, let's give it the old college try. And this amendment actually does something that I have said multiple times that I was not really interested in doing, but I do think making a last-ditch effort to address the shortfall in the state grant is worth trying it. So this amendment does make a permanent structural change to the state grant program. And what it does is make for-profit colleges ineligible. Members, we will end up spending somewhere around, or our state grant program, I should say, will end up spending somewhere around $13 million this biennium that goes to for-profit colleges. And for a little bit of context, since 2020, the amount that the state grant program has spent on for-profit colleges has increased by 57%, even as the number of students who receive state grants at for-profit colleges has gone down by 19%. The result is that the average award for for-profit colleges from the state grant program has nearly doubled in 5 years. And in fact, per student, the state grant program subsidizes for-profit colleges nearly as much as it does our Minnesota State universities. Now, for those of you who are interested in results, I could talk about how for-profit colleges have pretty abysmal graduation and degree completion rates. For those of you who, and I know there are a lot of you in this room who would love to talk about fraud, I could mention names like the Minnesota School of Business, Globe College, or ITT Tech. For those of you who are concerned about the cost of living and affordability, I could mention that because they are not as able to access subsidized loans, the average graduate from a for-profit college carries $3,300 more in student debt. But I won't mention those things. Instead, I will just say that with the structural shortfall that our state grant program faces, why should our state grant dollars be subsidizing huge corporations? Now, just one example, APEI, which owns the largest for-profit college in the state, had a total revenue last year of nearly $650 million, a 19% increase from the year before. The fact is that for-profit colleges can take the hit of coming off our state grant program. The students who depend on the state grant, which has been a bridge to affordable higher education for decades for middle-class and lower-income families, our students cannot.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm encouraging a no vote on this amendment. It's honestly stunning to me to hear Representative Coulter talk about this. This was never brought up in committee. We had multiple negotiations about how to fix the state grant and do structural changes. This idea was never brought forward in the negotiations. Representative Rarick, Chair Rarick, had 4 pages of potential structural fixes to the state grant that would have helped, and all of them were rejected. And so for this to come up on the floor is shocking. And I just want to talk about the substance of it for a minute. So what this amendment does is it will stop state grant funds from being used by students. The money doesn't go to these institutions. The money goes to students who choose these institutions for careers in cosmetology, for law enforcement, for IT, cybersecurity. Some of these programs are the most flexible and accessible way for students to choose them, and they choose them, and the money goes to the student. It doesn't go to the university. And so this is a red herring, and the very substantive proposals we had to address the state grant were all rejected. And so I think, members, that we should vote no on this. There's a lot of work to do when this bill goes to conference committee, and we can revisit that if someone wants to then. But we should not put this on as a House position, because I really think this is harming students who want to choose these programs, often very direct career-based programs, and we should let students who receive state funds use it for the schools that they find will help their careers the best. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Benton, Representative Wogemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge a green vote.
I recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to just note for members, I was listening to Chair Robbins and the fraud committee that she's the chair of, I'm the lead on. One of the themes that's come up this year quite a bit is the impact of the profit motive when it comes to our public programs. We've got public good, which is higher education. When you add this private profit motive, there's a particular concern that arises, and I think that we've seen that throughout. That's one of the benefits, actually, of the way the committee's operated, I will confess, is seeing this across a number of different programs, across the different jurisdictions of our different committees. And so when I look at the proposal here, I think this is a significant step and a real advantage when it comes to making sure that our public dollars are being used in the very best way that they possibly can. We know that we have terrific nonprofit private colleges in Minnesota. We think very highly of them, and we want to make sure that those public dollars are being used in the very best way possible. And when you have that for-profit motive, there's a significant concern when that arises. So I speak, members, in favor of the amendment and would urge a green vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out I do care deeply about fraud. There is a lot in this bill that will address the ghost student fraud problem and is important, but this will not help that. The profit motive is not the problem, as I have told my friends on the other aisle many times. The profit motive drives innovation, it drives entrepreneurship, it drives job creation, it drives a lot of things. It doesn't drive fraud. What drives fraud are criminals, and they're allowed to get away with it by agencies and state government who refuses to do their job. So I just want to be clear on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vote no.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Coulter yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Coulter, is the University of Minnesota a for-profit or a nonprofit?
Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representing the University of Minnesota is a public university.
Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Coulter continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative Engen.
Perfect. But they are also deemed a nonprofit university, correct?
Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They are a public university.
Under the same nonprofit status.
Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Coulter continue to yield?
He will continue. Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So how much do they have in their endowment fund, that tax-free hedge fund of theirs that they have?
Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representing it, I don't know offhand.
Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's $5.5 billion. In your amendment, we'd be limiting the state grant to nonprofit institutions such as the University of Minnesota's classification. Yes, it is public, but it is also classified as a nonprofit. And limiting them to those institutions that claim to be a nonprofit, yet are sitting on a $5.5 billion endowment fund, is pretty rich to say that the private for-profit colleges are deemed corporate. The word nonprofit can sometimes be used as a misnomer, and that's what I see here in your amendment. And that's why I'm going to be voting no on it, and I would encourage others to do the same.
I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Coulter yield?
He will yield. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Coulter, your bill significantly impacts many Minnesota students, but in fact, to my knowledge, we have no clue how many students this impacts. And so, Representative Coulter, my first question for you is, did you introduce this bill? And then my next, and maybe we should just start there, Mr.
Representative
Speaker.
Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Schultz, yes, this is a bill that I've introduced, and to answer what I'm guessing may be your next question, the number of students who received state grant awards at for-profit colleges last year was 2,788.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And do we have a fiscal note to say that, Mr. Speaker?
Are you asking him to continue
I'm
to
asking
yield?
Representative Coulter if he would yield to that question.
Representative Coulter, will you yield? Representative Coulter.
So the savings from this amendment would stay in the state grant program. It does not save the state or cost the state anything.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Coulter, you spent a great portion of this session arguing on bills in front of the Higher Education Committee on fiscal notes. So I would have assumed that you would have brought that information so we could base ourselves in fact, because right now what you stated on this floor, we have no basis to understand, especially because there was no bill brought before the House that actually contains this information. So I'm really curious as to why we're bringing this amendment today and right now, considering that every other bill that didn't have a finalized fiscal note was rejected in front of your committee. And so I'm just curious if you would continue to yield to another question.
He will continue to yield. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Coulter, do you have a fiscal note that you could provide to the body?
Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, again, Representative Schultz, this bill does not have a direct cost or savings because this eliminates from the state grant program for-profit colleges. The appropriation to the state grant program stays the exact same. But if you're wondering how much per year the state sends to students at for-profit colleges, my recollection from the 2025 state grant report is that it was $6.469 million.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Coulter, you know, a fiscal note would also tell us the number of students. It would tell us the amount of savings to the state grant program. It would tell us, Representative Coulter, how Minnesota students would benefit from this, or in this instance, which Minnesota students you'd be kicking off the state grant program, because those are people too, those are students too. And I just want to ensure that you want to support Minnesota students, which I'm kind of questioning right now. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering why we're even voting on this amendment if we don't have the information that can inform the body as to how Minnesota students can benefit from changes to the state grant program today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion to the amendment? I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So simply put, this amendment hurts students. It hurts nearly 3,000 students that choose to go to places like Capella University, Rasmussen University, Empire Beauty School. So are you really going to hurt students who want to go to cosmetology school, that want to go to business school? That's what we're doing here. That's what this amendment does, is you are hurting students, nearly 3,000 students that chose to go to one of these universities. Please, members, vote no on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and try and answer some of the few questions that were tossed at me. Representative Schultz, to answer your questions, all of that information is in the 2025 state grant report. All of the numbers that I just gave you came directly from that report. So yes, we do know. Representative Engen, the U of M endowment may be managed as a nonprofit. The University of Minnesota is a public institution. And as you can read in the amendment, in order to qualify for the state grant program, an institution must be, one option is, operated by this state or the Board of Regents of the University of Minnesota. The University of Minnesota will still qualify for the state grant, I promise you. And, you know, Representative Robbins, you know, and Representative Rarick for that matter, yeah, obviously I don't rely a ton on cosmetology services, but folks can get a pretty great degree in cosmetology at Metro State, at Minnesota State Southeast. And to the question about the profit motive, I didn't think we'd be talking about that here, but I guess I would just ask those students who went to Argosy University how much innovation that drove. So what I will say is this, members, you are free to vote how you like and justify it how you like. The reality is that the money that our state grant program spends on for-profit colleges could be 2,600 state grant awards for students at Bemidji State, at St. Cloud State, at Winona State. 1,100 awards for students in the University of Minnesota system, and 1,000 awards for students at Gustavus or St. Mary's. I will put it to all of you, and I will put it to Minnesotans anytime, any place. What is the better investment? Are Minnesota-grown schools or a giant corporation that made hundreds of millions of dollars?
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss,
ahead, man.
Bliss, no.
Bliss votes no. Hussein.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
Momani Hiltsley votes aye. Perez Vega.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 65 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are amendments at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment.
Cagle moves to amend House File Number 4252, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A26.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'd like you to all take a look at the map that had been passed out here, the one that has the Empowering Small Minnesota Communities on it. This isn't a program, this is a strategy to make sure that every community in Minnesota has a fair shot. Too often, small towns lose out on funding, not because they lack ideas, but they lose it because they lack the capacity. So the Empowering Small Communities program fixes that by connecting local leaders with the expertise they need to turn ideas into real fundable projects. This is a partnership between the Center for Transportation Studies, the U of M Design School, and U of M Extension Services. So why does this program matter? Small communities are competing against large cities with full-time grant writers and planning teams. Federal and state dollars are available, but only if you can navigate the system. This program bridges that gap by providing technical expertise, planning support, and grant readiness. This levels the playing field. So this is about self-determination, local leadership, and investing in every zip code, not just the big ones like mine. We're saying your community matters no matter the size. So this program turns local ideas into shovel-ready projects. It brings in more federal dollars into Minnesota, and it strengthens infrastructure, housing, and local economies. This is an extension of previously appropriated money, so there is no general fund impact, and this is one of the smartest returns on investments we can make. If we want a stronger Minnesota, we have to invest in every community, and this is how we do it. I also would just like to kind of run through the projects. This is a program that I'm super proud of, and being my last session, I'm going to take a little bit of time to brag about it. So bear with me. So we have a bunch of projects that have been funded throughout the state, and the first area that I'm going to focus on is kind of the northeastern part, the arrowhead, as Representative Eklund used to say, the part of the state that what is it, the Minnesota has a point or something like that? I can't remember. He did better. But there are 3 projects in Representative Skraba's district that have been funded through this. In Grand Marais and Two Harbors, they did a project that analyzes tourism waste and infrastructure impacts along the North Shore to guide sustainable growth. The Crystal Bay Township in Finland developed housing strategies to address shortages in rural Lake County. Embarrass plans to upgrade its fairgrounds and historic assets to support tourism and community use. Mount Iron Boys Fort area, they have explored solar energy development tied to community wealth building. In Representative Burkle's district in Baudette, War Road, and Badger, they did a community-wide planning for housing and workforce and economic development. Representative Gander's district has been one that I've been really excited about. It's been a really great project. The downtown revitalization and economic redevelopment planning of Crookston. And that program has actually taken legs, and after they were done with their U of M portion, they started their own Empowering Crookston group, and they're now meeting weekly to talk about things that they can do in their own community. Representative Bliss, you got one in Menominee in evaluating broadband expansion options to improve connectivity. In West Central Minnesota, Representative Murphy, Battle Lake, and Burgess has developed housing and climate energy plans to support long-term growth. Representative Backer in Pelican Rapids, they designed a multicultural community facility to support diverse populations. There's a multi-county prairie region one that includes Representative Anderson, Representative Swazinski, Representative Van Binsbergen, man, I almost had it right, Gilman and Harder, and this builds regional systems to connect local food producers to markets and strengthen rural economies. In central Minnesota, Representative Knutson, Wiener, Davis, Heinzman, Igo, and Warwas, you're Region 5, Cass, Crow Wing County, and they are creating a shared data and grant system to help small communities compete for funding. Representative Creshaw in Mille Lacs County, they're expanding rural transit options, especially for seniors and workers. In Hinckley, Representative Nelson, they're developing downtown improvements and wayfinding to support economic viability. Representative Torkelson, you've got a couple in here. You've got one for New Ulm, identifying sites for solar development, and then Lamberton, designing a new community park and recreation for quality of life. I've got one more here. There we go. Representative Torkelson in Redwood Falls, they're improving walkability and signage to strengthen downtown tourism. In Marshall, Representative Swazinski has, they're creating a 15-year park and recreation master plan. Morton, Van Binsbergen's district, they're doing maps of flood risk to guide mitigation and infrastructure investments. In Medallia and Lake Crystal, there's two separate projects, redesigning flood-prone parks and improvement resiliency and developing long-term community energy plans. Those are in the Mr. Speaker's district. And then we have our Southern Bluffs area, which is also got Hudson County's District 26B, Rapinski's. They're building a GIS trail system map to grow tourism and outdoor recreation. Also, they're in Representative Rapinski's district, Preston, they're expanding trail connectivity. And in Rushford, they're designing green spaces and event areas to support downtown viability. In Kenyon, Representative Allen, they're doing plans for safer walking and biking, safe routes to school. Representative Harder's district in Henderson, they're developing strategies for funding, transportation, and tourism. In Plainview, Elgin, and Millville, in Representative Jacobs' district, they're designing inclusive community gathering spaces with energy efficient features. Blooming Prairie identifies funding opportunities for playgrounds and community upgrades, and that's in Representative Mueller's district. Another one in Representative Olson's district connects in Winnebago and Welcome, connects infrastructure and community needs community needs assessment. And then we have a few here that are a little bit closer to the cities. Representative Engen has a project in Centerville with plans to improve downtown improvements and community engagement. Representative Reimer, there is a district or a project in Lindstrom, Centerville that designs connections between lakes, downtowns, and recreational areas. Representative Gordon has one in Harris that develops a long-term community growth strategy. And then Representative Purcell happens to be the lone Democrat who has one in her district that evaluates PFAS, landfill risks, and long-term environmental solutions. So this is $9 million that we have appropriated over 2 budget cycles. It's gone a long way. It's gone a long way in a lot of your guys' districts. Unfortunately, my district does have more than 15,000 people, so I do not qualify, but this has been a really amazing program that has brought communities together to plan for their own futures. This is simply an extension of an appropriation that we've already made. The university is about to, they're soliciting their 3rd round of funding right now, and we'll be moving on after the 3rd to the 4th as long as we can continue to get this extension through. So with that, thank you for letting me brag a bit about this program, and I hope you all can support the amendment.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in opposition to this amendment. I appreciate Chair Kegle's great work on all of this, but this was brought very late in the process, and when we reached out to the University of Minnesota, they said they did not request it and they do not need it. So they already have plans. I'll just read from their email. We already currently have plans in place to expend all of the funds within the originally scheduled window. So the university doesn't see this as necessary, and so I just don't think we need to add this to the bill. Thank you, members. Vote no.
I recognize a member from Benton, Representative Wogemont.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I recommend a green vote. And I would like to request a roll call.
Roll call will be had. Representative Rarick from the member from Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Right, so as Chair Robbins just said, the University of Minnesota didn't ask for this. We had no bill, we had no hearing. This just popped up at the last minute, and maybe just so that we could hear every single project in every person's district. I'm not really sure why, but here we are. So we don't need this amendment. The University of Minnesota does not need this. Please vote no. This is just consuming a lot of time that we could be doing other things. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this actually was brought to me by the Center for Design Studies at the University of Minnesota, so that is where it came from. And I just, you know, this is an appropriation that is already there, and I would really like the university to be able to continue all the great work in all of your guys' districts. So thank you. Please vote green.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, no.
Bliss votes no. Hussein.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momani Hiltzley.
Momani Hiltzley, aye.
Momani Hiltzley votes aye. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, yes.
Perez Vega votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment.
Hicks moves to amend House File Number 4252, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A27.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much, Speaker. This is a really simple amendment. It just allows RCTC and the City of Rochester to enter into a longer-term lease, building lease for their athletic facilities. The facilities at RCTC are aging, and the City of Rochester and RCTC have been meeting to try to discuss how to come to an agreement to help make those facilities work into the long term for our community. It doesn't cost any money, and it doesn't solidify the agreement. The agreement would still have to go through the board of the Minnesota schools, but it just allows the opportunity for the conversation to happen. I'd appreciate a green vote.
Further discussion to the amendment? I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A little bit more detail. Some of these facilities were, I guess, made with funds from a sales tax from the city. So it was a combination of the community college and the city sharing resources and then sharing, sharing the building of them, but sharing the utilization. And now it's decades have gone by. It needs work, repair. The city recently, we authorized a vote by the citizens for a sales tax extension. And in that extension is funds for doing this type of activity. So the cooperative effort between the city and the community college from decades, this would let that proceed for additional time with no cost to the state. Just giving the rest of the story.
Further discussion. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So again, we have no bill, no hearing. This came to us at the very last minute, It might be a great project, I have no idea, but we have had no vetting on this whatsoever. I would ask for a no vote on this because frankly, we don't really know what it is, what it does, or where it's going. Again, no bill, no hearing. No, we have no fiscal note. We have nothing to go by. I wish we had gotten this back in February. That would have been helpful, but we didn't. I heard about it very, very recently. I believe Thursday was the first time I heard about it. So, members, I would ask for a no vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Benton, Representative Wogemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recommend a green vote, and I also request a roll call vote.
There's being 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Wogemont.
Thank you.
I recognize a member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess maybe I've been around here long enough to remember past activity along this line. It's not in my district, but it's in my area. And I remember the cooperative efforts of local entities together for the betterment of the community. So I'm making this decision on the merits instead of who's offering the amendment.
Any further discussion to the amendment? I recognize a member from Olmsted, the author of the amendment, Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much, Speaker. There's no fiscal note. All it does is allow them to enter into a lease agreement if they choose, and the board does it. I'm a little confused because I thought the other side of the aisle was like really big into local control. It really doesn't do anything that is not just allowing two governmental bodies to have a conversation about what's going to work for public goods for public use. So I'd appreciate a yes vote. Thanks.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, no.
Bliss votes no. Hussein.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momani Hilsley.
Momani Hilsley, aye.
Momani Hilsley votes aye. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, yes.
Perez Vega votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 74 yeas and 58 nays, the motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The Chief Clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House Bill number 4252, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, for the conversation today. This bill is fine. It does do some good things. The funding referenced earlier to fight ghost student fraud is important for protecting the public dollars and the tuition dollars that folks send to our colleges and universities, and for making sure that financial aid goes to students and not the fraudsters. There is some good policy from the Office of Higher Education in here, and you know, we all like trees. I'm okay. You know, making that bold statement here. But I will say that I think we are missing a real opportunity to go after college affordability. To be frank, the tuition is too damn high. A recent Pew Research poll showed that a majority of Americans believe that higher education in this country is on the wrong track. And the number one reason, with a bullet, 79% overall, 78% of Democrats, 82% of Republicans say as much. They say tuition is too high. And what's interesting about that is that there's actually a pretty significant gap between folks who say tuition is too high and that the quality of education is too low. And so what that says is not that folks question the value of a college education. They just question the cost, and they're right to do that. We made significant, huge progress in 2023 and 2024. And if you ever have a chance to go to one of our college or university campuses, maybe there's one in your district, if you talk to the folks who work there, the folks who learn there, they will tell you that exact thing, that the North Star Promise has been an absolute game changer for making a college education affordable in the state of Minnesota. My fear is that over these last 2 years that progress has stalled a little bit. And so I think for folks who are asking that question, for families who are looking to pay for the dream of higher education, for students who want to better educate themselves, to better contribute to our economy and our society, they are a good investment. Our Minnesota families, our Minnesota students are a good investment. And my hope is that the next group of people who sit in these seats will make choices that show that.
I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I'll be voting against House File 4252, and the reason why is because of the intransigence that we have seen on the other side of the aisle as it relates to ensuring that tax dollars are for Minnesotans first. This body has chosen for 2 consecutive bienniums to put the needs of people who are here illegally ahead of the needs of Minnesotans. Our state government, over the last few years, since the DFL trifecta, has prioritized funding illegal immigrants. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of illegal immigrants receiving financial aid paid for by Minnesota taxpayers to go to our institutions of higher education. That is both in the North Star grant program and the state grant program. That means that Minnesota taxpayers, in the case of the North Star Promise, are providing for free, wholly paid college education to people who are here illegally. These are the priorities of the Democratic Party here in Minnesota.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Mason's Manual 124, paragraph 1, personality is not permitted. I would like to say that the use of the word illegal as it pertains to human beings is derogatory and dehumanizing, and we should refrain from using that term. Thank you.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we look at this, it's very clear. We have over 100,000 people who are here in Minnesota illegally. And the North Star Promise and the state grant program are provided to people who are here illegally without legal and lawful status. And this is a real question about Minnesota's state budget. As we debate right here a supplemental budget for the Office of Higher Education and consider where our tax dollars are going, the question here before us is, are we going to place the needs of citizens and those lawfully present first? Because this current state policy, because of the intransigence of Democrats here in the Minnesota House of Representatives, literally takes money from students, Minnesota students, who are either citizens or those here lawfully, and takes it away from their state grant and from their North Star Promise and gives it to people who don't have lawful status. That's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. But what makes it worse, members, is that this is one of numerous different policy priorities that the Democrat trifecta passed into law to create a magnet for people who are here illegally and for people from other countries to come here illegally. We're harming our own social safety nets for our own people. We don't have an infinite amount of money. We don't have a money tree. We don't have the ability to pay for every single person on the globe's college. You actually have already admitted that. You've admitted that through the principle that not every Minnesota kid gets the North Star promise. And yet, built the stipulations in law and have prevented reform to ensure that as it relates to financial aid at Minnesota's colleges and universities, that those dollars would be reserved for citizens and those lawfully present. That has been an active decision by House Democrats. And what does that result in? When we choose to benefit the people who are not here lawfully, our public programs falter. And we see deficits at places like HCMC because we actively decide and create a magnet to allow people from foreign countries to come here illegally
Point of order,
and benefit
Mr.
from our
Speaker.
financial aid programs.
Point of order, Mr.
State your point of order.
Mason section 101, we should confine remarks to the subject of the debate. I don't believe the debate is about how Representative Schultz feels about those living in Minnesota and their status. I believe we are talking about a bill. Thank you.
I'll remind members to keep their discussion to the bill at hand. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as a reminder to the body, we are discussing the supplemental budget for the Office of Higher Education and the higher education programs that are available to people in Minnesota, which currently includes people who are here without lawful status, no matter the place in the globe, no matter other eligibility requirements. We, as in the political left here in Minnesota, has made a conscious decision to spend our money, taxpayers, citizens of Minnesota, for people who are here illegally, and to create a magnet for more people to travel here illegally. This doesn't benefit Minnesota. And our social safety nets, our hospitals, like HCMC, are harmed because there are people who are not our own citizens benefiting from public programs. That is the intransigence, because of the intransigence of House Democrats, that we haven't seen action on this very priority. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students are benefiting from state taxpayer financial aid, and it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. So when we look forward, when Minnesotans look forward to what this state can look like, let's realize that we're talking about the bank accounts of taxpayers in every corner of this state. And when we're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to benefit people who are here in this state illegally, that is out of line with the values of most Minnesotans.
I recognize a member from Dakota, Representative Hanson J.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, members. I agree with Representative Coulter. This is a fine enough bill. We could do better, but we'll handle that next year. I'm looking forward to that. And I want to, you just heard a whole lot of things about what's absolutely wrong. What's absolutely wrong is what you just heard. Ask him to explain it sometime. He can't. In Minnesota, in order to get access to these programs, the students, if they are not born in the United States, need to prove that they are on the right track to do that. They need to prove that they have gone through the process. We talked about this extensively in committee. I'm surprised to still hear the same messages coming from that side of the aisle today. Folks who get access to our program must provide documentation that proves they are going through the pathway that this country has put forward for them to go through. They are doing the right thing. And if they're not, they don't get access to the program. So do not be fooled by what you heard from the other side of the aisle. It is fun for them to talk about it over there. I get that. But I think the people of Minnesota deserve to hear the truth and facts and not hear about people's feelings so much over there. These are people in Minnesota who are our neighbors. They are human beings. And for people like the representative you just heard of to talk about our faith so much, we've talked about going to the same college, Christian colleges. To continue to dehumanize Minnesotans is absolutely reprehensible. It is not what it looks like to be the hands and feet. It is not what it looks like to welcome the stranger. It is not what it looks like to claim to hold that faith and then act that way. I will rise every time to talk about this, every time, because on this issue, in the higher education bill, the folks who get access to this program have to show that they are going through the doors that this country put forward. And if that's not good enough for you, I can't wait to see all of the reforms that we'll see come out of DC this year, right? These are people who know that if they too have the opportunity to achieve a higher education, all of us benefit. Because when communities have more education, they're safer, they're healthier, they're better for business, the economy does better, everybody does better when everybody does better. That's something we believe on this side. So, again, I invite you to talk to the representative who was talking sometime about how this program actually works, or watch the committee hearing and see how well that went. But please do not fall for the trick that people who are not here, didn't get to be born here, are somehow not humans, worthy of inherent dignity and respect. And I hope more of you rise to talk about this when we see humans being dehumanized in this floor. It is an insult to the institution, and it is an insult to other people. So I'll leave it at that.
I recognize a member from Wright, Representative Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let's just talk about how we got here. So when we tried to do a higher ed budget last session and set the budget for 2 years, we were facing a $235 million massive hole in the state grant program. How did that happen? Well, free college. You tell people free college and they come running. So we went from 70,000 getting state grant to now 75,000 this year, and it's projected next year to be 88,000. So they're coming. And guess who's coming? The people that have the least ability to pay for college. So right now, the state grant program, about 43% of them are the poorest of the poor and get the most state grant. So we fixed that hole, the $235 million hole, last year. We fixed it. We closed the gap through policy changes. We cut some programs. I know I actually got Democrats to cut something, eliminate a program and put that money into the state grant. And then this year happened. So what OHE did, so Office of Higher Education, they took $60 million out of the second year, where we are right now, and put it in the first year and spent all but $15 million of it. So now we're facing a $131 million hole in the state grant program. $131 million hole in the state grant program. And we just fixed a $235 million hole last session. We fixed it. And now OHE has come in front of our committee at least 3 times and said, oh, whoopsie, we created a structural deficit, a structural imbalance. We didn't create that. That was created back in 23 by the you-know-whos that were in charge in 23. That you-know-who's trifecta that created a big old structural deficit imbalance in the state grant program. So now this year, we're like, well, maybe we can fix it again. So, I did what I do. And if you've been around very long, you know this is what I do. I have 4 pages of fixes to the state grant program. 4 pages. That's what I brought to negotiations, to fix the $131 million big old hole in the state grant program that was created because the other side during the trifecta created a structural imbalance. So it's no surprise that not one of these ideas, not one, is in the bill that you have in front of you. You know what? I could have fixed that structural imbalance with 4 line items. With 4 things, I could have fixed it. The entire thing, $131 million. And you know how many things that the other side of the aisle agreed to? 0. You know how many ideas they brought into negotiation? 0. Just put more money in it. It'll be fine. Put more money in it. We have a structural imbalance. Put more money in it. So this bill doesn't fix anything. The one thing it does do, I will give it this tiny bit of credit, is at least we're getting to the ghost student issue. And in OHE's policy, at least they're dealing with saying, okay, now if you've committed fraud elsewhere in state government, you don't get state grants. So I mean, I'll give you that, but there's not a whole lot in here. There's nothing in here from my 4 pages of fixes to the state grant program. So you know whose kids are gonna be hurt? Every kid in the districts that we all represent are gonna be hurt because they're not gonna get state grant. The money has been spent. Every opportunity that we had to fix it was no. We were told no, 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 we're not doing that. So I personally, even though I was in the negotiating room and have ushered this through, to my chagrin and disappointment, there's nothing in this bill that I find worthy of voting for. And members, for the first time in my entire history on a bill that I worked on, I'm voting no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just wanted to talk about the things that I thought were great in this bill, and also agree that there's a lot of work left to do. So the couple things that are really positive about this bill is that we put $1.5 million in to address the ghost student problem, which we all recognize is a growing issue for our state colleges. And I'm very pleased to see that we had strong bipartisan support for that. We also have language in the bill that allows the state to deny financial aid if an applicant lies or provides false or misleading information on their forms or verification requests. So that's another way we're addressing fraud. And we've also just, you know, a small thing, but it was a good win. So we had a terrible storm, as many people know, up near Bemidji State, derecho last year, and the college in the woods lost their woods. And so they put in a request for $800,000 for new trees on campus, which is far more than we can afford. But we worked with them, and we worked with the researchers at the University of Minnesota, and it turns out our amazing scientists at the University of Minnesota have come up with a hybrid tree that's fast growing that we can buy much more cost effectively. So we are gonna, in this bill, provide trees for the University of Minnesota at Bemidji State for small amount of $5,000 for 250 trees. So we want to support our state colleges, and that's an easy win in this bill. But to the points other people have said, we did not fix the state grant program. And there are ways we could have done it, as Chair Rarick pointed out. And every structural attempt we made was rebuffed. And so I am very disappointed in that. I also share Representative Schultz's concerns about the free college and funding for illegals who are here without pursuing proper status. There are many people here who are on a path.
Point of order. I don't have the
State
thing
your
in front
point of
me.
order.
Again, but it's the.
What is your point of order?
What was it? 124. I would ask members to please refrain from using the word illegals when describing human beings. It is very dehumanizing. And this is actually not just my words, but the words of Senator Hoffman, if y'all have seen his viral video from committee the other day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll continue my remarks. To be clear, I'm not trying to be dehumanizing. It is their legal status. It's not about them as a person. It's about their status in the country. If they come here illegally, they are illegal. And I am not going to be silenced on the floor of the House of Representatives for speaking with appropriate language. And I do not think this body should continue to interrupt over the use of language. That's appropriate. That's legal terminology. And so just to finish it up, I will be voting for this bill. I understand a lot of people have concerns on a number of fronts about it. But I do think there's hope to go to conference committee with the Senate and still work on the state grant issue. And so because of that and because of the fraud control measures in the bill, I will be voting green, and I encourage members to vote your conscience.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. So I don't sit on the Higher Ed Committee, but I heard something a little while ago that I think is a really clear values statement that I want to point out. One of the representatives was speaking and said that it was a real problem that we had more people that were interested in going to college in Minnesota, that went from 70,000 to 75,000 to 88,000. And the issue was it was the poorest of the poor, and that is an issue. The values is it should not matter the size of your bank account, whether you want to go to college and improve yourself. And I think what I heard there was just a clear value statement that I just fundamentally disagree with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further? I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Lee X.
A quick Google is saying, and y'all feel free to do this, illegals is not a formal legal term in U.S. statutory law, but rather a pejorative shorthand noun used to describe people residing in the country without authorization. While illegal alien has appeared in limited federal statutes, the shortened noun illegals is considered inaccurate and dehumanizing by legal and journalistic standards. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, point of order under Mason's section 101, number 2, persistent irrelevance. A member who resorts to persistent irrelevance or persistent repetition after the attention of the House has been called to a behavior may be directed to discontinue speaking by the presiding officer.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
My point of order comes from Mason's section 124, paragraph 1, offensive statements. This includes the term illegals. It also includes members standing up to members offering advice, folks who, I'm sorry, Representative Nash is just going to stand up and tell somebody that they're wrong about their own culture. We just need to call that out. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
I'm a little confused, just given the fact that we've been considering a bill that got calendared for the floor today, and I've heard multiple people speak, and they all seem to be speaking against it. So I'd just like to be reminded, what point of business are we on?
Representative Hudson, we are on the final passage of House File 4252. Any further discussion to the bill? I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Benton, Representative Wogamon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before we get to the bill, I'd like to set the record straight on a couple of things. First of all, to any of the students watching this debate who were the subject of offensive and degrading insults in the discussion today, we apologize. We see you, we value you, we appreciate what you bring to this state and what you bring to this workforce, and we support your education. We need you. So we apologize and we thank you for your hard work and your studies. I also want to set the record straight about the state grant program. We as House Democrats refused to let the state grant program deficit be used as a tool to gut valuable programs and opportunities at our public colleges and universities, vital programs at the University of Minnesota, vital programs at our Min-State colleges and universities all across the state, all across the districts. If we were actually serious about fixing the state grant program, then last year we would have gone together and asked for a higher target to address it. We got a 0 target. We've done the best we can, but we are not going to sit here and be told that we don't care about the state grant program and have it be used as an excuse to gut programs to the U and to Min-State that students depend on. To the bill at hand. This bill is far from what I would have liked to see as a full bill if I were the full higher education chair, as I'm sure it's probably far from what Chair Robbins would have wanted if she was a full chair. But we have a tied House, and we did work together in the best faith that we possibly could to come up with the funding to address the GO students, as well as the funding for the trees, and working with OHE on their recommendations. I want to thank everyone on the committee, all the members, for showing up and for your contributions. I also would like to thank our dedicated team of staff, our committee pages, Amber Dunham and Nick Johnson, our House researcher, Nathan Hopkins, our House fiscal analyst, Ken Savory, the Republican committee administrator, Garrick Spinwin, the Republican researcher, Jesse McArdle, and the Republican committee legislative assistant, Ellie Wasserman. And I want to give a special thanks to my dream team, the DFL partisan staff, our DFL committee legislative assistant, Carl Yeager, the DFL researcher, Evelyn Weiner, and our DFL committee administrator, Sean Herring. We appreciate all those efforts, and we will continue to do everything that we can as this bill heads a conference to support Minnesota's students and the institutions where they learn. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I ask for a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, no.
Bliss votes no. Hussein.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momani Hilsley.
Momani Hilsley, aye.
Momani Hilsley votes aye. Perez Vega.
Go ahead.
Perez Vega, yes.
Perez Vega votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll.
Okay, what's the next one? 9.
There being 82 yeas and 52 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.